Hello, folks. I am AJ Ayers, one of the co-founders here at Brooklyn FI. I've got Bobby, our marketing coordinator, on standby, hanging out here as well. If you have questions, drop them in the chat or the Q&A. It doesn't really matter. Some of you submitted questions ahead of time, so I will answer those at the end. But feel free to drop in questions as I'm talking, and I'll try to notice them and answer them as we go along. So let's get into it. So we are here for the webinar that has the unfortunate title of What to Do If You're Laid Off from Your Job or How to Prepare If You Think It's Coming. We are in a bit of an uncertain in economic time at the moment. Hard to say. Throughout history, we are always in an uncertain economic time, but we really have seen an uptick in layoffs in the tech sector, an uptick in layoffs in companies that have been on a hiring spree. We sort of started to see this shift between, employers desperate for talent, trying to hire as much as possible with great benefits, great salaries, and then things not going the way they planned. 2022 was a hard year for the stock market, a hard year for growth in the tech sector. So we have started to see this shift of maybe we hire too much, or hey, our bottom line doesn't look as good as we projected. We need to make some cuts. So that's kind of the environment we're in right now and why we are doing this webinar today. So yeah, hey, I'm AJ. I know I see some familiar faces here, so I know some of you. I'm CFP, have some other designations. I'm one of the co-founders here at Brooklyn FI. Been working with a lot of you over the past really 5 years. Been through a few different cycles of layoffs, whether it was early COVID, middle of COVID, trying to keep our jobs, but really talking about this current layoff cycle of it's a big surprise, big shock for a lot of people. So let's get into it. Before we get started, yeah, drop your questions in the chat. I will try to answer them as we go through. And yes, we'll have a recording of this webinar posted on our website, brooklynfi.com/events. So yeah, let's just get into it, right? When we are laid off or we think it might be coming, the environment isn't so good. Some things to think about. This is not the end of the world. Your job is not your entire identity. It can feel like that sometimes. It's also not personal. These decisions get made for many reasons. Unfortunately, this round has felt, I think, very impersonal, very hurtful for a lot of people because these are companies that a lot of you have worked at for maybe years, in some cases even decades, and you might be receiving a cold email that says, hey, you no longer work here, or in some extreme cases, you can't log into Slack one morning because you have been locked out of your systems. It's not personal. Just please remember that. I think that's really important to separate, you from your manager, you from the company. It is going to be tough. You're going to get through it. It's not the end of the world. And just a reminder, a lot of our clients have an emergency fund set up, right? We have some cash set aside. If there is ever a time to use your emergency fund, this is it, right? That's when we do that calculation, we say, how much is the cost to live your life? Let's have, 3 to 12 months of those expenses saved in case you need it. We are here. So don't be shy about using that emergency fund, realizing, moving yourself past the point of panic to say, hey, I prepared for this. I have a financial plan. I can get through this. And then finally, if there was ever a time in your life to reduce your expenses or get a handle on cash flow, that time is now. You can use Right Capital, which is a tool that we use with our clients, or something called Tiller HQ, which is just a great budgeting tool. Let's get a handle on our expenses. For those of you that know our budgeting philosophy here at Brooklyn FI, it's not, hey, let's spend less money on dining out or less money on shopping. But if there ever was a time in your life not having that income that you're used to, let's do a bit of belt tightening. Things are a little bit more expensive now with inflation. So just keep that in mind as you're adjusting your financial plan. So let's talk about the big ones. How do we handle a layoff, or how do we prepare for one if it's coming? And there are so many details to get into in terms of what your employer provided, and maybe something that you are relying on. But I think the big ones here that we're going to spend the most time on are what to do with your stock options, what to do with your 401k, and how to handle insurance. So we'll go through each of these. This is sort of my little agenda for today. So let's begin with stock options. So I think the most important thing with one of the most important things with stock options is knowing what you have and making sure that you get to hold on to that data when employment ends. So make sure that you have copies of these documents, the plan document, what covers the whole stock grant, the whole stock plan, and then your individual stock option grant document. Many of the companies that you work for use CARTA that's CRTA for those that are not familiar. That would be where we hold these grant documents, where we hold your equity. you will still have access to systems like Carta. Pulley is another one that I've seen a lot of companies use. You will not lose access to that when your employment terminates, but it's a really good practice to make sure that you have copies of these documents here. So if you are thinking that a layoff might come, or even if you're thinking about a job change in general, always good to just have your own file on your personal G Drive or whatever system you use that is not related to your work email. I want to stress that a lot. If you think that a layoff is coming, make sure that you don't use your work email for anything personal. We all do it. It's a bad habit that a lot of us have. Like, hey, I run my whole my life calendar through my work calendar because that's the one I look at. But if you think a layoff is coming, just general tip, let's start to unwind that and replace that with our personal email because we're obviously not going to lose access to that. But back to equity compensation, it's important to know what you have. How many options do we have? What's the vesting schedule? For Brooklyn FI clients, we know all of this. We can help you make a decision about when to exercise, if exercising is even a good idea. Can you exercise your options? Sometimes we will find clients in a position, we've experienced this recently, where a layoff has happened. They have vested but unexercised options, and they are underwater, right? Maybe we had some non-qualified stock options that have been vesting, but their strike price is actually higher than the stock is trading for, at that moment, which when we have underwater stock options, we see those as worthless. And unfortunately, with a layoff, typically, our expiration date for those, the time that we have to exercise those options gets shrunk down quite a bit. So just keep that in mind that you may end up, unfortunately, having to leave some underwater stock options on the table. Typically, it really does not make sense to exercise those underwater options, even if they're going to expire. Make sure, when you're separating from your employer, you will have a separation date. So that is typically the date at which vesting will stop. We'll talk about RSUs in a minute. But just let's talk about the different types of equity compensation that you might have. So ISOs are incentive stock options. Don't want to really want to hammer this point home. If you have incentive stock options, you have 90 days from that termination date, that separation date, to exercise any vested options, period, no matter what anyone else tells you. There are some companies that are a little bit flexible, whereas after 90 days, those ISOs convert to non-qualified options, which we'll get to in a minute, but cannot stress this enough. 90 days, that's the law, that's the IRS, it's statutory, that doesn't change. I've seen some really weak blog posts online that actually go against this, but that is the rule of law. Very important, don't wait till the last minute. 90 days can feel like a long time, but if you have made the decision that exercising your incentive stock options is the right move for you, it can take quite a bit. There's a lot of paperwork involved. So don't wait until, it's 2.5 months in, you've left and you weren't sure. Look at your financial plan, talk to your financial planner, make a decision, and just get that exercise started. Also, if you have such a short window and you have incentive stock options and you're not in a position in terms of cash and potentially paying any tax bill to exercise those options, you can potentially ask to have that exercise period extended. Now, remember, they will only be treated as ISOs for those 90 days, but you could be able to exercise them as non-quals if your employer allows. I realize every situation is going to be different, but really it doesn't hurt to ask is kind of our thought here. So with those non-qualified options, remember, these are the option to purchase stock. The problem with non-qualified options, especially at public companies, is that it's very risky to exercise non-quals when we don't have liquidity, meaning there isn't a public market for us to turn around and sell those options to receive a profit. So unfortunately, you will not only have to have enough cash on hand in the bank to pay the exercise price or the strike price of these shares, but you're also going to be subject to ordinary income taxes. With our ISOs, those are nice. We have our potential to pay AMT. Sometimes you won't end up paying AMT, but with non-qualified options, as soon as you exercise, that is a taxable event. You will owe income tax. So that's, in my opinion, often exercising and holding non-qualified options can end up being riskier and more expensive than exercising and holding those ISOs, those incentive stock options. And then, of course, we have our RSUs, our restricted stock units. Unfortunately, I'm going to say unfortunately a million times because this is unfortunate, right? Leaving a job that you were at and you were planning to stay at for a long time. That's the facts that we're dealing with. So all unvested RSUs are lost at termination, meaning You leave your job, RSUs stop vesting, but anything that has been vested already is yours to keep. So we get a lot of questions about, well, what if I work at what if I work at a private company where I've had RSUs? Typically, we call those double trigger RSUs, meaning that they've been vesting this whole time you were employed, but you didn't actually receive the shares until that second trigger happens, such as your company going public. Or some kind of other liquidity event and acquisition. A lot of clients, this has come up at one of our biggest private tech companies right now, Stripe. We have a lot of double trigger RSUs. So make sure you're really familiar with those documents. Ask your financial planner to just reassure you, like, these are my RSUs. If I leave, I still get to hold on to them and wait for that public event in the future. You don't have to be working at the company to receive that benefit when they go public in the future. Okay, so deciding whether or not we should exercise these shares, lot of considerations that go into this. When your company is private, the most important thing you need to know is, how many shares are vested and what is my strike price? How much does it cost to exercise these shares? But really, what is the 409A? What is the current fair market value of that stock? They're not public, so the market doesn't get to determine it. Actually, the company themselves typically goes out to a third party and asks them to evaluate the price of the value of the company, divide by the number of shares of stock, and that gives us our 409A valuation. So this can be a big hurdle to exercising because sometimes we find ourselves in these sticky situations where you're ready to exercise. You ask your financial planner to do a calculation of how much it's going to cost in tax to exercise these options. And your company goes, we don't have a 409A, or we're updating it right now. We're not sure. We're going through an investment round. So that is a tricky situation to watch out for, which is why I never want you to wait too long to have a conversation about exercising your options, because typically when things are, in turmoil, whether your company is, downsizing right now, or, maybe they're even shutting down. If your company is shutting down, options are worthless, unfortunately. So, I think the past, 2020 through 2020, early 2022, unfortunately, a lot of us got used to, my options companies just go up in value. The stock market just goes up. And then in 2022, we had that correction. So it is possible that your options that were promised to you as part of a compensation package and were illustrated to, increase your annual compensation, it's possible that they could be worthless. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Whether the stock is private or public, there will likely be some taxes due with that exercise. So keep that in mind. One option that we like a lot here at BKFi is if you do not have the cash to exercise and pay the tax bill, there are these third-party partners out there that will essentially loan you the money at no risk to you in exchange for participation in your exit. So if you are at a buzzy private company and you've got incentive stock options and you're laid off, you might want to reach out to an ESO fund or an Equity Zen or an Equity B or a SecFi, any of those places, to see if they're interested in helping you exercise your options. And typically, each deal is different. They're gonna get 20 or 30% of your exit on the way out. What else do I want to say here? Oh, super important if you're gonna explore one of these deals, start now, because it takes time for them to do their due diligence. It could take 60 days for the deal to get done. So remember, we have that 90-day period to exercise our ISOs. Okay, so when we leave our employer and we are executing a transaction of either selling, maybe we're selling non-quals up the same day because our company is already public, or we're exercising options, that transaction will likely have tax consequences. In most cases, when you are no longer an employee of the company, they are not actually going to withhold any tax for you, which means that it is up to you to pay that tax. So we have a ton of situations where an unsuspecting person doesn't exercise and there's no tax withheld, and they think, well, oh great, there was no tax on this transaction, I'm clear. But unfortunately, for example, like exercising non-qualified options, if you're not an employee, typically that withholding is not done, and you won't actually ever see withholding. It is up to you to calculate the tax that you owe. So if you are ever exercising non-qualified options, as a non-employee, super important to check in with your financial planner and make sure that you're paying the necessary tax on there, because the penalties can be pretty nasty. So I think we just dropped some links into the chat. We've got a great blog post that goes in super in depth on each type of transaction. This is just a screenshot from that. If you want to check that out, if you're concerned that you may owe some taxes. And for those of you who are just, oh, here we go, a nice meme break. Little fun joke for you there. Probably in poor taste, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I will try to answer them live. Okay, so that was stock options. Let's move on to the 401k. Most common question I get from clients and just my wider circle of friends and acquaintances is, if I leave my job, what do I do with my 401k? And I like to think of stop, drop, and roll. If anyone ever did like fire or earthquake exercises in like elementary school, like what do you do? So first of all, stop. You probably don't need to do anything immediately. Your 401k is fine hanging out at your former employer. Next step, drop. Call when you do have a new 401k, maybe when you get a new job, or maybe you're self-employed and have your own 401k. We've seen a lot of successful transitions with our clients from the tech world to owning their own businesses. That is when you will want to see what's going on with the new 401k and potentially move the old 401k, which brings us to rollover. Complete that rollover paperwork and get your check to complete a direct rollover. That's really important. We don't want the funds to ever leave the protection of the 401k space. So we call it a direct rollover. And if anyone has been through this, you can always ask your financial planner here at Brooklyn FI to help you with that whole process. It can be a little nasty. The paperwork is never fun. But if you are, in the hierarchy of panic when you leave your job, the 401k is the least of your worries. Most of the time, it can just hang out there. I am ashamed to admit that I still have a 401k from a job that I left almost 8 years ago. It's just hanging out there. I haven't gotten around to rolling it over. I think humility is important. And even as a financial planner, I've probably done 100 rollovers for clients, but I still can't get to my own. We are all human. So yeah, what do we do with your old 401k? The biggest danger here is that you forget about it, honestly, that you change your address and your 401k provider can't reach you. What else? Yeah, make sure that the only real reason to want to move this 401k right away is if your company is truly shutting down, or if the plan is shutting down. And we do see that. It's pretty rare, but for the most part, not to sound like a broken record, your 401k is fine where it is until you're ready to move it somewhere else, until it's ready to land at your new 401k at your new job. Employer contributions in terms of vesting. In 2022, 2023, we've started to see a lot of 401ks have contributions that immediately vest, meaning that if you had a match in your 401k throughout the year, that would be your money right away. Sometimes, unfortunately, we do see employer matches that are subject to certain vesting requirements, like have you been at the company for X number of years? So just check the document that governs your 401k. It's called a summary plan document. You can go ahead and check that out, and that'll tell you if the employee your match has already vested, and if that's your money, or if they might claw that back, which sucks. All right, so setting up your new 401k. So let's be positive, right? We're gonna land somewhere else, right? This is a temporary state that we're gonna get through. We have our emergency fund. We're gonna be fine. When you have your new job, we want to make sure that we don't over contribute to our new 401k, because your new 401k didn't know about the contributions that you already made. So we made a 401k maximum contribution calculator, which you can find on our website through the link that just got dropped into the chat, which is real nifty. And essentially, it will help you calculate what your new contribution should be after you have already made contributions at a different employer. So in this case, I just threw this example together. So this person, had a few paychecks contributing to their old 401k. This is the amount. You can find that right on your paycheck. You can have the year-to-date amount that you contributed to your 401k so far. And our calculator will tell you exactly how much you need to contribute to your new 401k without going over the contribution limit. As many of you know, if you stick with one employer throughout the whole year and you accidentally over contribute, your employer will just shut it off once you hit that 20,500 maximum. But when you switch jobs, they don't know that you've already contributed, and you'd run the risk of running over the limit. Slight caveat, if you do run over the limit, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to jail. You will just get a nice little check in the next year for that over contribution limit. That'll be taxable because you already got the break for it last year. So, just part of this webinar is also to kind of de-escalate the things that might be like crisis mode, right? There's a lot going on. Our goal is for you to be focusing on, getting through this time period and finding the next best place for you, and anything else that's stressful, we can typically handle by de-escalating or just, figuring out what the answer is and helping you implement it. So check out this 401k calculator anytime you start a new job. Also, if you have a mega backdoor Roth 401k, which I know many of you at tech companies do, I know Google has one, this will also help you with that calculation as well. Important with the mega backdoor is that when you leave a job, we want to make sure that the conversions within the plan happen before you leave. If this is all gibberish to you and you don't know what I'm talking about, it probably means you don't have one, so you can ignore this section. But we have seen situations where a person has left a job and actually didn't convert their contributions to that Roth IRA before we left. It's not the end of the world again, it just gets a little bit messy. So we want to make sure that we're doing the conversion in service, meaning while we're still employed at that place. So that can be really helpful. Just give them a call. The biggest 401k provider in this country is Fidelity. We see a lot of mega backdoors at Fidelity. We see a lot of them at Vanguard. Those are typically the two most common providers. Both of them have great customer service. Just call them up and say, am I good? I have a feeling I might get laid off in the next month. Like, are all of my contributions converted? Or, hey, I've just been laid off. Tell me what my options are for this account. The mega backdoor is an incredible tax benefit. It's an incredible tool to save for retirement, but there are a lot of sticky rules around it. So we just want to make sure we're not tripping up anything unnecessarily. All right, moving on to insurance. Oh, I see a bunch more of you have just joined us. Well, welcome. If you have any questions at all, please drop them in the chat. I know some of you submitted questions ahead of time, but I will answer anything live if you want me to expand upon anything or if there's anything I haven't covered so far. Right, so salary and equity are big parts of compensation packages, but in this country where health insurance is tied to your employer, unfortunately for a lot of families, this can be one of the greatest losses in a layoff. Salary can be replaced, equity, there's another chance at that, but when especially if there's a family that's relying on you for your health insurance coverage, this can be pretty devastating. And in fact, to me, this is actually the scariest thing for a lot of our clients about losing that job is like, what do I do about health insurance? I have some chronic condition, or I still need to see my therapist, or hey, I'm pregnant, and what do? I don't want to change doctors. I don't want to go to the health insurance marketplace. I want to keep my plan. So what are the options that you have? Well, first of all, going without health insurance is not an option, in my opinion. So when you leave an employer, typically you are removed from that company plan and you have a few options. You can typically continue that coverage that you had, the same coverage that you had through your employer, but pay for it on your own as an individual. That is called COBRA. We don't always recommend COBRA because it is typically very expensive. Typically it's 2 to 3 times the rates that you can get in just the regular health insurance marketplace at your state. So COBRA makes sense in pretty extreme cases. Hey, you're going through active treatment for some kind of illness. Pregnancy is a good reason to keep COBRA and just pay for it and have no interruption in your healthcare providers. But for the most part, COBRA is not a great option for those who are, have been laid off or looking for that next job and just need something in between. Depending on your situation, you can also try to negotiate with your employer. I have seen employers come back and say, hey, I need 3 more months of help. Can you keep me on the insurance for 3 more months? not everyone's going to say yes, but I think that's definitely something that's worth asking for. And really what happens most of the time is you're separated from your employer, and then you go off to the insurance marketplace, because separating from an employer is known as a qualifying life event, which makes you eligible to participate in a different type of insurance. So typically, if you're in New York State, you would go to the New York State health insurance marketplace. You would say, I have a qualifying life event, I need insurance, and you basically go shopping on the marketplace for a plan that will carry you through until your next employer. Some other kind of fringe things to think about: if you live with a partner who you are not married to, and they are employed with access to health insurance, you might want to consider a domestic partnership. Some insurance providers, not every single one, will allow you to join their insurance for what's going to be, in my experience, a lower cost than you would get if you actually went out to the marketplace to try to get your own coverage. But yeah, I think health insurance in this country, unfortunately, is tied to our employer. This is a great reason to, try to find that next job. I think a lot of our clients who think about making the transition to being a self-employed individual, this is one of those big hurdles we have to get over. Health insurance at the Googles and Spotifys and Blocks of the world, those benefits packages are excellent. They're some of the best we've ever seen. And part of that layoff situation can be losing access to those benefits. So I have definitely talked people out of starting their own businesses, unfortunately, because this is such a big expense, especially if there's other people that need to be on your plan. All right, so what about those pre-tax health accounts that you paid into? So we've got our FSA and our HSA. Don't see a ton of HSAs and FSAs for our tech workers, just because the plans are so good that often the employers are just covering everything. And you can't have an HSA with a with a low deductible plan. So typically we don't see a ton of these. Our FSA, those are our tax advantage dollars that we can use for everything from dental work to sunglasses. I sometimes buy my Supergoop sunscreen, my expensive sunscreen, with FSA dollars. But the problem with the FSA is when you leave your job or are let go from your job by someone else's hand, not yours, you lose those dollars. So if you think that a layoff may be coming, get yourself to a drugstore, get yourself to FSAstore.com and buy a bunch of Advil and sunscreen, because you will lose access to those dollars. You forfeit them. That's an unfortunate part of these accounts. The limits here are just a couple $1,000s, so we're not talking about massive losses, but just keep that in mind. HSAs, these are yours to keep. So if you've got an HSA, typically you would roll it over to your new provider in the future, or just keep it where it is. Not a ton of risk here with the HSA. FSA, bad news in a layoff, unfortunately. Disability coverage. So disability insurance, in my opinion, is one of the most important parts of a financial plan, but it is one of the most difficult parts of a financial plan to actually implement. So a lot of you may not know that you have disability insurance through your employer. And in 10 seconds or less, disability insurance is insurance for your income. So if at any point in your life, should you lose the ability to earn that income, it insures your income. So you still are able to earn that high salary or a percentage of that high salary, so you don't have to change your life in any dramatic way. Fun fact, disability is 4 times as likely as death. We focus a lot on life insurance, and disability insurance kind of gets left in the dust. And the most common form of disability, is not freak accident dismemberment. It's actually just back pain. So debilitating back pain, typically due to stress or sitting in these chairs all day. So unfortunately, that's where we see disability insurance claims happening. Super important benefit that was paid by your employer in most cases. Unfortunately, getting individual disability insurance is it's a hard pill to swallow because it can be so expensive, thousands of dollars a year to insure your income. So this is one of those benefits that, as you're looking at that next employer, making sure that there's disability coverage. If you are going to make the leap from, being an employee to being a business owner, being self-employed, being a freelancer, it is absolutely imperative that you get your own disability insurance policy, because no one's going to help you out there. There are some government disability benefits, but they are not going to cover the lifestyle that you are accustomed to if you lose access to that income. So I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but joining a professional organization, often there are great group disability policies. There's something called the Freelancers Union that has a great group, not a great, it's a okay policy that will get you somewhere, will protect you a little bit. So yeah, disability and coverage, that's one of those. Was a great benefit from your employer. Try to look for it at the next place you're going to land at. Okay, so those were our three big ones, right? We talked about equity compensation, we talked about the 401k, and we talked about insurance. One thing that didn't make it on here is just life insurance. Life insurance is typically, employers will offer a very small amount. Kind of the most common thing that we see is $50,000. Typically your employer just pays it. If you had more life insurance through your former employer, typically what we call these buy-up plans, often you lose access to that plan. Sometimes you can take it with you. Sometimes they're what's called portable. So do make sure you reach out to HR or that insurance agent or that you got that more life insurance to your employer with to find out if you can take it with you. If you have young kids or kids who aren't yet in college, getting a standalone life insurance policy, getting a term policy that's going to be affordable, I would probably recommend that just so you're not dependent on your employer for that super important benefit. We don't want to end up in a situation where the people relying on your income, one day you're gone and there's no way for them to continue their lifestyle. A term life insurance policy can really help with that. So if you had one through your job, check to see if it's portable, and probably a good time to think about getting one on your own that's not tied to an employer. All right, so just some housekeeping items, as you're making this transition. It's funny, we did a version of this webinar, I think it was like 2 years ago, for folks who were just leaving jobs, just changing jobs because the job market was so competitive. And a lot of advice is still the same, but unfortunately, often what we're seeing right now is that the job changes are not by your own hand, or unfortunately coming from decisions getting made in boardrooms for various reasons. But some housekeeping, if you are going through a job change, grab your paychecks. Especially right now we're seeing, a ton of staff is getting laid off. Maybe the HR team is getting gutted. So make sure that it's really up to you to maintain your data and take it with you and make sure it is saved outside of your work email. For those of you who just joined us or joined us later, one thing I really stress is if you think you're predicting a layoff or just general best practices, as an employee, do not use your work email for anything that you will need access to after your employment. Make sure you use that personal email for all those 401k things, insurance, etc. Grab your paychecks, download them. If you're going to seek out some financial advice, your financial advisor should be asking you for your paycheck. If your financial advisor is not asking you for your paycheck, you should probably question whether that financial advisor is giving you a comprehensive plan. There's so much we can tell from that paycheck that will help us with tax decisions, with life decisions, all of the above. If you disqualified any stock options, we talked a lot about stock options in the top half. If you made any stock options moves, make sure that you grab those paychecks from those specific dates where you made moves, because the document that you're going to get at the end of the year, that W-2 that you download or was mailed to you, that's not going to show your tax preparer the individual transactions. And without getting too much in the weeds, essentially what can happen is if we don't see those individual paychecks with the withholding that happened, sometimes we run into cases where you end up paying double taxes on your stock options. So if I had my way, when you leave a job, go and download every single paycheck from the past year or two, or anytime you had options that were exercised or RSUs vesting. This last one, if you can, I always say make friends with HR. It's always great to have an HR contact so you can get things faster. But make sure that you have a contact there, because you will likely at some point, either this year or next year when we're preparing your taxes, there might be something that you didn't grab that you're going to need to help you make a decision further down the road. Unemployment, apply for it. Every single state is different. Unemployment benefits are run through the states, and most of the time you still can get unemployment, which is typically a weekly payment while you're receiving severance. So if you were laid off, maybe there's some sort of severance agreement in place. Maybe it's a month of pay. In some cases, we've seen a whole year of pay for folks who have been with these companies for many years. But in most cases, you still can apply for and receive unemployment benefits while you're receiving severance. Severance is seen as a one-time payment. It's not seen as steady income. other general things, just where we're dealing with housekeeping, make sure you understand the company vacation policy. We see a lot of tech companies with this promise of unlimited vacation, which can be great, but unfortunately, if you leave a company and you haven't taken any vacation, there's no kind of payout. But if your company does have a set number of vacation days, you may be actually entitled to a little bump in that last paycheck because they'll pay you out for any days that you haven't used yet. The converse of that, unfortunately, is if you've taken more days off than you've earned, you might actually see your final paycheck shrink a little bit because you essentially would have to pay out your employer for the days that you took, over that suggested, or over that the number of days that you had that year. Getting in the weeds a little bit, sometimes we see tuition reimbursements or student loan payments covered. There are some cases, I've never seen this in practice, but I've heard of potentially, especially in a layoff. I wouldn't imagine a company asking for this payment back. But if you quit a job in the middle of them paying for an extra degree or some kind of certification, you might be expected to pay that back if it was by your hand that you're leaving the company. And this last one, keep your address updated for that W-2. A lot of things are digitized these days, but for some reason, we still see a lot of W-2s being sent in the mail, and that's the most important tax form that reports your income at the end of the year. So if you have any kind of portal like Workday or JustWorks or ADP, any of those, please make sure your address is updated in there. The shock of a layoff and the immediate panic of not being able to get into those systems, typically some of the HR systems, your 401k, of course, any kind of insurance portals, those you still should have it. Carta for your equity, those you still should have access to, even after employment ends. Okay, and that is the end of my presentation. And just some questions that were submitted ahead of time. What can be done in preparation for a potential layoff? I think we covered that pretty extensively. My best advice is just to gather the troops, gather your documents, anything that you think you might need. After this layoff happens, get it now, put it in your personal email, put it on your personal computer. A lot of us use our work computers for everything. So in terms of, this isn't necessarily like financial preparation, but just making sure that things that you might need to access are not on that work laptop. We're all guilty of that, using our work calendar for personal events and things like that. But now is a great time to kind of start shifting away from that behavior. And then someone asked, what do you do with your 401k? What are benefit options? I think we covered that pretty extensively, but just to reiterate, your 401k is totally fine to hang out where it is until you're ready to roll it over to your new job. And that 401k can accept it. Those were the questions submitted ahead of time. I see we have a little bit of a quiet bunch here today, but if anyone has any final questions about this transition, my heart really goes out to those that have been laid off, or those who have spouses who have been laid off, or siblings. It can feel very personal, right? And it is not. I want to reiterate that. And really the best advice I have for you during this time is just to get through it. It's a temporary state. Being out of work is, hey, I had this job, but now it's gone. Let's focus on the positive. Let's focus on getting that next great job, finding a place that's a really great fit for you. Every job market is going to have its pros and cons. Right now, I think there are a lot of layoffs across our client base. We're seeing them. That's quite the opposite from what we've seen from the past 2 years, where our clients were literally like batting away offers from competing companies. So, the economy is cyclical. We will get out of this together. But BKFi is always here to answer your questions. Your financial planner is always here for that quick call. This stuff can get really nitty gritty. If you have specific questions about paperwork or things that you should do, fastest way to get an answer, send us a screenshot of the thing you're looking at and say, what do I put here? And someone will get back to you and help you sort it out. So with that, I think if there are no more questions, I will go ahead and wish you all the best, and hope if you're on this webinar, hopefully that it's to potentially prepare for something. If it's already happened to you, you're going to get through it. Thank you so much for attending, and I will see all of you hopefully at a future webinar. Thank you so much.